The wind was always restless on the edge of town, like it too wanted to escape but never quite could. It stirred the brittle grass, whispered along the clapboard houses, and carried stories no one dared speak aloud. That evening, it brought with it a silence more unsettling than gunfire, heavy as sorrow and sharp as dry bone. Ellen stood at the edge of the porch, arms folded over the apron she hadn't taken off, though the stew was long gone cold on the stove. Her eyes weren't on the horizon so much as beyond it, somewhere far past the dusty plain, somewhere green, perhaps, or at least quiet. Her skin held the sun's memory, though the fire behind her eyes had dulled over years of trying too hard and getting too little. She did not cry. She hadn't in weeks. It had been squeezed out of her like water from a stone. Behind her, Helena sat on the step with her knees drawn tight to her chest, skirt hem dragging in the dirt, face slack with the confusion that lives between childhood and knowing too much. 19 years old, barely, with a heart like spun glass, clear, delicate, and always in danger. She'd stopped asking questions 3 days ago. That was the day her father took to town again, full of whiskey and ruin, wearing the coat he saved for losing. They heard the hooves before they saw them. 4 riders, slow, deliberate. A 5th horse followed without a rider, black as ash, saddle empty. The girl stood. Ellen did not. The gambler was first down. Slim shoulders, stained collar, a man once handsome but now thinned by poor choices and bad sleep. He didn't look at his wife or daughter. He looked at the man beside him, the one who did not dismount, the one who surveyed the yard like he already owned it. Jedediah Rourke. Jed was not loud. He didn't need to be. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room and drain it of all warmth. Leather gloves, dark coat, dustless boots. His hair was graying but his back was straight, eyes pale as morning frost, and colder still. His men fanned out silently, 2 behind him, 1 staying near the gate. Ellen's hand went to Helena's shoulder. The girl didn't move. "Your husband has made an agreement," Jed said, voice low and sharp enough to slice silence. "Not a trade, no. A debt. Cleared." Ellen felt the breath leave her but didn't gasp. That would have given him too much. Instead, she stepped off the porch and stood beside her daughter. She looked at the gambler, the man she'd married out of desperation, and the years rolled through her like dust through fence slats. He couldn't meet her eyes. Just said something about owing too much, about being out of time, about this being better than what those men would have done. He'd signed the paper. That was all that mattered now. Jed nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward and held out 2 pairs of worn gloves. "You'll need these," he said. "The road to the ranch is long, and the sun don't forgive." Helena tried to step back, but Ellen steadied her. "Not yet," she whispered, the words barely formed. "Not now. Be still." They walked. No handcuffs, no rope. Just presence, force, the weight of ownership. Helena cried only once, and it wasn't from fear. It was when she saw the horse her father had taken from her 6 months earlier, sold for whiskey and cards, tied up behind Jed's wagon, marked with a new brand. It was too much. The town watched. They always did. From behind curtains, through cracked doors. Eyes like shadows. Not one stepped forward. 2 cowboys leaned against the saloon wall, boots dusty, hats low. One was young, fidgeting with the strap of his saddlebag. The other older, quiet, unmoved. He watched not with curiosity, but recognition. As if he'd seen this before, too many times, and each time it carved a little more out of him. Luke was his name. Most folks just called him that. No one knew if it was first or last. Just Luke. The younger one, Caleb, shifted his jaw like he was chewing words he couldn't spit out. When Helena passed him, he looked down. Luke didn't. Jed's ranch was 2 days east, near the canyons. They slept in a spare cabin the first night, a single room with a cot and a floor blanket. Ellen let Helena have the cot. She sat against the wall, knees drawn, awake until the stars faded. The silence between them was full, not empty. There was nothing to say yet. Only breathing. Only being. The second day, Jed spoke more. Told them how things worked. Told Ellen she would cook and clean and maintain the ledgers. Told Helena she would be left alone, for now, until she proved herself useful. He made it sound polite, like it wasn't a cage being built word by word. When they arrived, the ranch looked like any other. Wide pens, long barns, a house big enough for 10. But it felt like a tomb, clean, quiet, and cold. A woman stood at the top of the steps. Mabel Rourke, Jed's sister. Late 50s, face like a dry creek, eyes sharp. She didn't smile, but she didn't look cruel either. Just tired. She nodded once, turned, and went back inside. Ellen and Helena were given a room in the back. No lock. But not a door that closed all the way either. That night, after hours of sweeping and sorting and feeding livestock, Ellen sat by the window. Helena slept beside her. The stars looked the same here. But the silence didn't. It was too still. Like the land held its breath. Back in town, Luke sat outside the bunkhouse, sharpening a blade not because it needed it, but because his hands couldn't stay still. Caleb paced. "We could do something," Caleb said, again. Like he had the night before, and the one before that. Luke said nothing. "She's just a girl," Caleb hissed. Luke nodded, slow. But his eyes were on the horizon. Watching. Waiting. Back at the ranch, Ellen held a broken comb in her lap. It had been hers since Helena was born. She used to hum while braiding her daughter's hair. She hadn't hummed in years. She wanted to now. But it stuck in her throat. Helena woke just before dawn. She touched her mother's hand and whispered, "I'm scared." Ellen didn't lie. So she only said, "I know." Then she brushed Helena's hair with the old comb. Gentle strokes. Like music. Like forgiveness. They heard footsteps. Jed again, asking for coffee. No anger. No threats. Just presence. He lingered at the door, watching. Helena looked away. Ellen met his eyes. "I don't break easy," she said, soft as a lullaby. He didn't reply. Just walked on. The wind came again that afternoon, curling around the window panes, lifting skirts of dust and swirling it into the distance. Ellen watched it dance across the field and felt something she hadn't in years. Not hope. Not yet. But awareness. Of movement. Of breath. Of the fact that things, even terrible things, did not stay still forever. That night, Helena found a small scrap of paper beneath the blanket on her cot. It had one word. She looked to her mother. Ellen didn't ask who or how. She only pressed the paper to her lips and nodded once. Out on the far side of the ranch, behind the last row of fences, someone had left a length of rope knotted just so, hanging from the edge of the corral gate. Luke never signed his name. He didn't have to. And the wind carried the rest. Dust gathered in the corners of every room at Rourke Ranch, even though Ellen swept twice a day. It wasn't dirt from neglect. It was older than that, finer, like ash from a fire long gone out. It lived in the beams, in the creases of the curtains, in the quiet places behind doors. It remembered things no one spoke aloud. And it never left. Ellen moved like a ghost through the house, silent, efficient, eyes low. She cleaned the same stairwell each morning, polished the same pewter handles, folded linen with sharp corners and no complaint. But her silence was not surrender. It was strategy. She was learning the rhythm of the place, the way shadows shifted through the halls, the sound of Jed's boots on the floorboards, the times of day when the locks turned and the key was left carelessly on a hook by the kitchen. Helena, kept mostly to the garden shed in back, was allowed outside only under supervision. Jed said she needed time to understand her place. What he meant was control. She wasn't to speak to the stable hands. Wasn't to go near the fence line. Her window was nailed shut from the outside. Still, Helena listened. And Ellen remembered. They had always shared more than blood. Quiet glances, codes, a language of eyebrows and small hand movements. Every breakfast plate became a message. Every change in their routine became a map. Jed's world was built on order. He believed in hierarchy, in roles set like stones. His cattle were marked, his records inked in perfect lines, his employees paid in silver coins stacked neat in a box. But Ellen could see the cracks in it all. Mabel was one of them. Jed's sister was not cruel, but not warm either. Her face wore the lines of someone who had waited too long for change. She managed the accounts, ran the kitchen when Ellen wasn't there, and sometimes watched the girl from the porch without saying a word. One evening, as Helena passed with an armful of washed shirts, Mabel handed her a lemon drop wrapped in wax paper. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. The men on the ranch avoided Ellen. Not out of fear, but a kind of respectful distance. They called her Miss Ellen, never ma'am, never anything else. Some of them looked away too quickly. Others held their gaze too long. She took note of both, and of one man in particular, Old Red, a stable hand with white in his beard and breath that whistled when he laughed. He said little, but twice he left extra oats for Helena's favorite mare, the one Jed hadn't yet sold off. Back in town, Luke worked the same as ever. Mended fences, hauled barrels, helped Caleb reshoe a spooked gelding with a ruined hoof. But his thoughts were elsewhere. Always elsewhere. Caleb noticed. "She's still out there," Caleb muttered one morning while tightening a saddle strap. "Don't pretend you don't know it." Luke didn't reply, just leaned against the fence, fingers trailing over the grain of the wood. His face was weathered, not from age but exposure, to sun, wind, silence. His eyes were unreadable, the kind that had seen too much and said too little. But that afternoon, when the church bell rang for the hour, he turned his head toward the east, toward Rourkeland. Jed continued to test Ellen. He asked questions designed to trip her up, about payroll, supply counts, recipes. But she never faltered. She was not just surviving, she was studying him. Every comment, every pause, every cruel little smirk. She filed them all away. One night, he asked her to sit at the dinner table instead of eating in the kitchen. Mabel stiffened, but said nothing. Ellen sat. Jed poured wine. His fingers brushed hers. "Do you miss him?" he asked, meaning the gambler. Meaning the man who sold her like livestock. Ellen looked down at her glass. "No," she said. Her voice did not shake. Jed smiled. It was not a kind smile. Afterward, she scrubbed her hands until they burned. Helena, meanwhile, found her own small rebellions. She loosened a board behind her cot, slipped a sliver of a mirror inside, wrote on the underside in coal from the stove, "Soon." A single word. A promise. She began leaving notes where she knew Ellen would find them. In the hem of her apron, tucked beneath the broom. Words like ready and rope. Ellen answered in kind. Wait and watch. Then one morning, a shift. Old Red passed Ellen on the way to the barn and muttered without meeting her eyes, "North fence needs mending. Gates loose." She didn't speak, just nodded. That night, after Jed had retired, she crept out beneath the porch slats and followed the dark until her feet met the old boards of the north fence. There, tied around the base of a fence post, was a single twist of rawhide. It hadn't been there before. And beside it, pressed into the dirt, a boot print. Not Jed's. Not his men's. Too careful. Too familiar. Luke had been here. She returned to the house with her breath held tight and her spine upright. Across the yard, Helena watched from her window. She had loosened the bottom hinge just enough to move the glass. She saw her mother return. She felt something shift in her chest, sharp and full of light. The next day, Jed left for town. Said he'd be gone until dusk. Mabel took over the ledgers, gave Ellen a list of errands that didn't need doing. But Ellen accepted them. While the house was still, Ellen took the kitchen knife, the small one, sharp and narrow, and slipped it into her boot. Helena watched the gate. The men were elsewhere, out driving cattle or hammering new shingles to the far shed. The house seemed asleep, until a whistle rose, sudden, shrill. Helena ducked. Ellen froze. Old Red came running from the barn, shouting something about a loose mare and broken reins. Jed's second in command, a man named Price, cursed and went after him. Ellen didn't wait. She ran, fast and quiet, toward the edge of the yard where the shadows fell from the tool shed. Helena was already there. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Ellen handed her the knife. Helena pressed it to the rope binding the shed door. The knife slipped once, but didn't fall. The rope gave. Helena flung the door open, just enough to slip inside. Ellen followed. They crouched in the dark, breathing hard, eyes wide. Footsteps. Not Red's. Too heavy. Too slow. Jed. He hadn't gone to town. Not yet. His voice rang out, sharp and amused. I do like a bit of cleverness, Ellen. She rose, stepped into the light. Helena stayed hidden. Jed stood 10 feet away, hand on his belt, not yet at the gun. It's always the quiet ones, he said. You, especially. You've got that soft face, but you think too loud. Ellen said nothing. He stepped closer. The dust beneath his boots curled up like smoke. You could have had comfort, he whispered. Safety. Maybe even kindness. You sold that word a long time ago, she said. He laughed. Cold. Dry. Then he moved. But Ellen did too. The kitchen knife was not meant for fighting. But she'd sharpened it that morning, and she knew the angle of a ribcage better than most. It went in shallow, but it was enough. Jed staggered, clutched his side, cursed with a breath that cracked. Helena burst from the shed and ran. Not away. Toward her mother. They didn't finish him. They didn't stay. They ran together, toward the northern edge of the property where the fence had been loosened, where hope waited in the form of a knotted rope and a man watching from a tree line. They didn't speak until they saw him. Luke. Helena gasped. Ellen stopped running. Her knees trembled, but her voice was calm. He's coming, she said. Luke nodded once. No questions. Then he turned and led them into the dust. Behind them, the wind rose, and the ranch shrank into a blur of fences and smoke. But the dust never forgot. And neither did they. The forest they fled into was not thick, but it was enough. Enough to hush hooves and hide breath, to make the world feel bigger than fences and barns and cruel-eyed men. Trees here leaned like old women at prayer, and the ground softened under moss and needles. The sky, framed in shifting green, gave them cover where law could not. Luke didn't lead with words. He led with knowing. A flick of his hand meant quiet. A glance over his shoulder meant pause. Ellen followed without resistance, Helena close behind, her breath high in her chest like a bird trying not to be heard. They moved for hours, north and east, away from roads, away from eyes. The farther they went, the more the silence became not fear, but balm. They made camp in a hollow of pines near a cold stream that whispered in the dark. Luke had a stash there, a blanket, some jerky, a pouch of dried beans. No fire. Not yet. Smoke would be a beacon. Instead, they ate what they could with trembling hands. When Helena shivered, Ellen drew her close and wrapped them both in Luke's coat. He did not offer it with words. He simply placed it beside them and sat down nearby, eyes scanning the trees like a man who had learned to read silence as scripture. That first night, none of them truly slept. Ellen kept one hand on Helena's shoulder and the other wrapped around a sharpened stick she'd carved by moonlight. Luke rested with his back against a tree, hat pulled low, one boot pressed to the earth like he was listening for the past. By morning, the world was still theirs. No dogs. No men. Just dew and birdsong. But they knew it wouldn't last. Luke led them to a cabin 2 days' ride farther north, tucked in the crook of a ravine where the wind rarely reached. It was a place he'd built long ago, when solitude was his only comfort. It had one room, a single bed, a broken chair, and windows covered in muslin to keep out light. There, they stopped running. For now. Ellen wasted no time. She cleaned the space until it smelled like soap and wood instead of old smoke and despair. Helena gathered stones for a fire ring and used the heel of a boot to grind dry herbs into powder. Luke disappeared each day into the trees and returned with meat, mushrooms, and once, a stack of brittle pages torn from a newspaper he'd found abandoned in a trapper's lodge. He gave them to Helena. She read each line aloud that night with a voice more steady than it had been in weeks. It was not safety, but it was breath. In the quiet days that followed, something began to grow between them. Not romance, not yet, but something deeper. Familiarity. Trust forged in glances, in the way Luke left his rifle closer to Ellen than to himself, or the way Helena laughed at nothing just to hear herself sound alive again, and Luke didn't stop her. One afternoon, Ellen found herself humming, just under her breath, a half-forgotten tune she used to sing while folding laundry, back when Helena was small and life hadn't yet hardened around her like a shell. When she noticed the sound, she stopped, embarrassed. But Luke only looked up from where he was sharpening a blade and said, "Real soft, that's a good song." The silence between them shifted then, not broken, but filled. Helena, meanwhile, changed more quickly. The confinement at Rourke Ranch had done something to her, pressed her into something sharper, more aware. She asked to learn how to trap rabbits, how to shoot straight, how to tell time by the sky. Luke taught her without ceremony, and Ellen watched as her daughter grew steadier, less fragile. There was still light in her, but it had learned to wear armor. One night, as they sat near the fire pit eating stew from a single tin bowl, Helena asked Luke why he helped them. He stirred the stew, slow. His voice came like wind through dry grass. "Because I was too late once," he said. "Didn't want to be again." Helena didn't ask more. Ellen didn't need to. She saw it in his eyes, the memory that held him like a shadow. He hadn't just seen cruelty before. He'd carried it. Later, after Helena had gone to sleep, Ellen and Luke sat by the coals. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "What did you lose?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. But finally he did. "A sister," he said. "They took her for spite. I was out mending fence. Came back to a house with broken windows and no sound." Ellen closed her eyes. She didn't reach for his hand. But she wanted to. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. "It never leaves," he said. "Just settles deeper." From then on, their movements became more deliberate. Luke began scouting the road again. Not because they'd been found, but because they would be. Sooner or later. Rourke wouldn't let go without hunting. Power was his god, and he'd been shamed. He wouldn't rest. Caleb returned to the story one morning with a knock on the cabin door that sent Ellen to her feet, knife in hand. But when she saw his face, sunburnt, thinner, but unbroken, she dropped the blade. He'd come north with word. Town talk said Rourke was calling in favors. Hiring bounty hunters. The law wouldn't touch it, not with so many hands in Rourke's pocket. But there were men who didn't mind getting blood on their boots for coin. Caleb stayed 2 days, long enough to rest and teach Helena how to swing a lasso right. Then he left again. Said he'd watch the roads from the south, send signal if he saw movement. The cabin grew tense. Not from fear, but preparation. They made plans. Luke carved escape paths into the trees with hidden markers only he understood. Ellen packed food into satchels. Helena drew maps in charcoal. Still, there were quiet moments that refused to be swallowed by the threat. One afternoon, as rain fell gentle and thin, Ellen and Luke stood beneath the porch overhang watching it stripe the earth. She leaned into the doorway, arms crossed. "You don't talk much," she said. "No need to," he answered. "You ever wanted to?" He looked at her then, and something passed between them. Something not spoken, not rushed. His eyes were tired but clear. "Only with the right person," he said. She didn't smile. But she stayed beside him until the rain stopped. That night, Helena asked her mother if they were ever going to stop running. Ellen tucked a blanket around her and answered with a softness she didn't know she still possessed. "We're not running. We're surviving." Helena looked at her, eyes searching. "Do you still believe people can be good?" Ellen's breath caught. "Yes," she said, "but only because some of them have shown me how." Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and old water. The moon rose behind clouds, a pale promise. Luke stood watch at the edge of the woods, one hand resting lightly on his holster. He didn't believe in fate, but he did believe in timing. And he felt something coming. In the days that followed, more messages came. Caleb sent word of movement near the southern bend, 2 riders, asking questions, flashing silver coins. Men who didn't smell like ranchers. Ellen read the note aloud and folded it with care. Then she placed it beneath her pillow, not out of sentiment, but readiness. Luke sat her down after supper. His voice was gravel but kind. "We might have to run again." Ellen didn't flinch. "Then we run." He looked at her for a long moment. Not like a man appraising value, but like someone memorizing something holy. "You're not who he thought you were," Luke said. "Rourke. He thought you'd break." She shook her head. "He never understood that silence isn't weakness. It's where strength grows." Luke smiled, just barely. "That night," she sang. Not loudly. Not for an audience. Just a verse of something old, something she'd carried so long it had become part of her bones. Luke heard it from the doorway. He didn't go inside. Just sat down near the steps, leaned back, and let the sound carry. And the next morning, a mark appeared on a tree at the edge of the ridge, a red ribbon tied in a figure 8. Helena found it first. She touched it once and ran back, hair streaming behind her like a flame. They were coming. The night began with stillness, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against the skin, that made the pulse slow not from calm but anticipation. Every tree stood like a witness, every gust of wind a messenger. The forest didn't sleep. It waited. Ellen sat on the cabin's wooden floor, back against the wall, her fingers winding and unwinding a length of thread she'd pulled from a torn hem. Across from her, Luke stood by the window, watching the tree line where the last of the day had vanished. Helena dozed lightly near the hearth, wrapped in 2 blankets, her breath thin, her fists curled beneath her chin like a child trying to keep the world at bay. They'd eaten little. Not from lack, but appetite had left with the daylight. Caleb hadn't returned. He was supposed to. The plan had been simple. Watch the southern bend, mark the road, return by dusk. But the sun had dropped, and no sound came through the woods. No crunch of dry twigs. No signal. Not even a bird call. Ellen knew better than to panic. But dread had a way of making its home in the ribs. It settled in hers like a second heartbeat. She didn't voice it, though. She let Luke be the eyes. She stayed still. There was no plan for tonight. Only waiting. Only readiness. Luke finally turned from the window. His voice came low, deep, measured. "If they're close, they'll wait for dark. They want surprise." Ellen nodded. Her fingers didn't stop moving. "Do we run?" "No," he said. "Not tonight." Helena stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, like it hurt to wake. "Did they find him?" "We don't know," Ellen whispered. Helena sat up. Her face looked older in the firelight, cheekbones sharper, eyes hollowed from days without rest. But there was steel in her now. Whatever part of her had been soft for the world was gone. Luke paced once, then knelt by the door and began unrolling a canvas bundle. Inside were tools of quiet violence, a small pistol, a hunting knife, wire, and a slender coil of rope. Helena watched, and for the first time, didn't flinch. "Who taught you to fight like that?" she asked. "My father taught me how to shoot," Luke said. "The rest I learned from losing." Ellen said nothing, but her fingers stilled. The fire had been reduced to coals. No more wood would be added. Smoke was risk. Light was risk. They would sit in the dark, feel the world with their skin, and wait. Ellen finally rose and walked to the cupboard where she'd hidden the revolver. It wasn't hers, not truly. It had belonged to one of Jed's men, dropped in the dirt the night they escaped. She'd picked it up without thinking, cleaned it twice since. She held it now as if testing the weight of a choice already made. Helena stood too. "Teach me," she said. Ellen met her daughter's gaze. This wasn't a child asking. This was a woman ready to bear her own name. She showed her how to load the cylinder, how to brace her wrist, how to breathe before squeezing. They practiced once, twice, then no more. Enough to know. Enough to act. Luke watched them both and said nothing. Hours passed. The moon rose but offered no comfort, just a pale reminder of how exposed they really were. The wind changed direction. That mattered. It always did. Then came the sound. Not loud, but there. A horse's breath, snorting once into the night air. A twig cracked. Then another. Luke stood. Ellen followed. Helena slipped the revolver into her belt like it belonged there. They didn't speak. There were 3 of them, men dressed not like cowboys but like shadows. No spurs. No loose buckles. Faces half covered. They moved like hunters, confident, rehearsed. Luke waited until they came into view, just past the edge of the trees. Then he stepped outside, slow, hands empty but firm at his sides. "Evening," he said. One of the men laughed. Not out of humor, just the tired, mean sound of someone who thought the ending was already written. "You, Luke?" Luke didn't answer. "We're here for the girl. Boss says to bring her back breathing. No promises for the rest of you." Luke stepped forward. "And if we say no?" The man shrugged. "Ain't really up to you." Inside the cabin, Ellen pressed Helena toward the rear wall. There was a trapdoor there, old but functional. Luke had carved it weeks ago, leading to a small crawlspace dug by his own hands, just deep enough to hide a heartbeat. "Go," Ellen whispered. "No," Helena said. "You go when I say. Not because you're weak. Because I'm your mother." Helena swallowed, nodded, slipped through. Ellen turned back toward the door. Outside, the standoff hadn't moved. Luke's voice cut through the cold. "I've got no quarrel with you. Walk away." One of the men stepped forward. "She ain't yours. You're just a fence. And fences break." The next moment happened in silence. Luke's knife flashed. The man went down. The second reached for his gun, but Ellen was already at the door, revolver raised. She didn't hesitate. One shot. Not clean, but true. The third man ran. Smart. Gone before Luke could turn. Inside, Helena climbed back up, wide-eyed but dry-cheeked. Luke dragged the wounded one into the trees, tied him tight with the rope he'd unrolled hours ago. He returned with blood on his sleeve. "He'll talk when the sun rises," Luke said. Ellen lowered her revolver. The dead man lay near the steps, his face slack, eyes open. The smell of iron and smoke clung to the air like judgment. Helena didn't look away. Luke turned toward them. "They'll come again. Next time with more." "Then we don't wait," Ellen said. Luke nodded, but his shoulders slumped. The weight of what must come had finally settled. They spent the rest of the night burying the body, deep and silent. Ellen said no prayers. Helena placed a stone at the head. By dawn, Caleb returned. He limped, hat missing, shirt torn, but alive. "They saw me," he gasped. "I pulled them south, lost the trail. But they know now. There'll be more by tomorrow." Ellen gave him water. Luke gripped his shoulder. "You did good." Helena helped clean the cut on his temple. She didn't smile, but her hands were gentle. By midday, the decision had been made. They wouldn't run again. Not like prey. They would move, yes, but with purpose. Toward something, not just from. Ellen sat by the fire pit, sharpening a stick to a point. Not because she needed it, but because it helped her think. "We find a place we choose," she said. "Set the ground. Make them come to us." Luke nodded. "There's a canyon near here. Narrow. Easy to guard. We lead them there," Helena said. "Like they're driving us." "And then what?" Caleb asked. "Then we let them see what fences are for," Ellen said. "Not to keep things in, but to keep danger out." The longest night passed not in terror, but in resolve. Something had broken. Not in them, but in the order of things. No longer hunted. No longer silent. By evening, they packed. Left the cabin behind. Left the grave. Left the memory. The path ahead was not smooth, but it was theirs. As they walked, Ellen looked back only once. She did not mourn. She planned. The canyon waited like a held breath, narrow, quiet, a mouth in the earth wide enough to swallow sound and secret. They reached it at dusk, the sky bruised violet behind them. Trees fell away into stone walls, their bark replaced by cool slabs of shale and sandstone. The trail narrowed until even Luke had to walk sideways in parts, leading the horses single file while the others kept watch. Each hoofstep echoed off the stone like a slow drum. It was the place he'd spoken of, twisting paths, ridgelines flanked by steep drop-offs, one way in and one way out. If a trap were to be set, it would be here. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. Here, the land did not pretend. It either held you or it didn't. They made camp deep in the throat of the gorge where the sun touched only briefly before retreating into shadow. Helena and Caleb gathered wood with care, dragging dry branches down from the overhang. Luke built the fire low and close to the cliff wall. Ellen lined stones around it, her fingers steady, deliberate. Her body remembered war now. How to listen, how to move with breath instead of panic. There was no talk of retreat, only preparation. The wounded man they'd left tied in the woods had given them enough. Names, numbers, directions. Rourke had hired 5 more to ride north. Bounty men. Greedy, careless, but skilled. Paid in advance. Promised more if they returned Helena breathing and Ellen willing. No mention of Luke or Caleb. They were obstacles, nothing more. But Ellen knew men like Rourke. She'd known them in saloons and shops, in the crooked mouth of her husband, in every hand that had ever rested too long on her arm. Men like him wanted obedience, not understanding. He hadn't counted on quiet people who moved like water. He hadn't imagined that silence could harden into stone. That night, she sat beside Helena near the fire. Her daughter rested her head against her shoulder, not as a girl might, but as a partner in something irrevocable. There was still fear in her. But it lived beside resolve now, not beneath it. "Are you ready?" Ellen asked softly. Helena didn't open her eyes. "I've been ready since the night he touched my shoulder and smiled like he owned the air I breathed." Ellen kissed her forehead. "Then you're stronger than I ever was." Helena turned her face up. "No. You just never let anyone see." In the dark, Luke worked alone, digging a narrow trench across the path's curve, laying down caltrops he'd shaped from old nails and iron scraps. Caleb strung a wire across the trail, low and invisible in moonlight. They moved like men who'd waited years to do something right. By morning, they were ghosts among the rocks. Ellen took high ground, rifle in hand. Luke stood at the choke point near the bend, where riders would have to dismount. Caleb crouched behind a stone ledge, revolver gripped in both hands, jaw tight. Helena was nowhere visible, tucked in a narrow crevice behind the trail's edge. A sharp knife sat across her lap. She breathed slow. The first shot wasn't fired by them. It came from the north, a warning crack that split the sky. Then came the thunder of hooves. 5 riders. Dust in their wake, the sun behind them. Ellen sighted down the barrel of her rifle. Her fingers did not tremble. The lead rider slowed, saw the canyon's shape, the turn in the trail, and gave a signal. The others stopped. Then came the voice. "Bring out the girl," it said. "Make it easy." Luke stepped forward. The echo carried his calm like scripture. "You're not leaving here with anything but regret." Laughter answered. "We've done this before, friend. We ain't afraid of rock and dirt." Luke didn't move. He didn't speak again. The man signaled, and 2 riders advanced. That's when the wire caught the first. His horse reared, screaming. The man was thrown sideways, struck the stone wall with a sickening crack. The second shouted, wheeled his horse around. Ellen fired. The bullet took him in the thigh. He tumbled, clutching his leg, swearing as he rolled to the ground. The canyon came alive then. One of the others dismounted and ran for cover, gun drawn. Caleb rose from behind the rocks and fired. Missed. Then again, this time striking the man in the arm. He collapsed behind a tree trunk dragged there by the stream. 2 left. 1 still mounted. 1 stayed back, not moving, not firing. Watching. Helena watched from her hollow. Every breath was a drumbeat in her chest. The knife felt warm in her hands. Then the last rider spoke. "Ellen McAllister, you and I need to talk." The name hit the air like thunder. Ellen lowered the rifle and stepped out from cover, but not without keeping her hand on the trigger. The rider dismounted, slow, deliberate. His boots crunched gravel. His hat shadowed his face until he was close enough to lift it. Jedediah Rourke. His smile was like a cut. "You've caused me quite a bit of trouble," he said. Ellen didn't reply. Her heart beat slow. The sun caught her hair, her eyes. She looked like nothing he remembered. "You could have had comfort," he said again. "A house, food, safety. You offered a cage," she answered. "And what do you call this?" he asked, gesturing at the chaos. At his wounded men. At the blood on the stone. Ellen didn't blink. "I call this earned." He drew his weapon. But Helena moved before the shot rang out. She rose from the crevice like smoke, sprinting low, silent. Rourke turned too late. The blade sank into his side. He grunted, staggered. Ellen fired once. The bullet hit just above the heart. Not fatal, but final. He dropped to one knee, blood soaking through his coat. "You think this changes anything?" he gasped. "It already has," Ellen said. Luke stepped forward and took the gun from Rourke's limp hand. Behind them, the remaining bounty men dropped their weapons. Caleb approached, face pale, blood on his sleeve from a graze. He looked to Ellen, then to Helena, who stood with the knife still in her hand. She dropped it. "It's done," she said. Rourke lived, but barely. Luke tied him to a mule and sent 2 of the wounded men south with him. Word was left in their hands. Return him to town, let the sheriff decide whether power still mattered. None of them expected justice. But none of them feared him anymore. They stayed in the canyon 2 days, long enough to breathe again. Then they moved north, deeper into the hills. Found a stream, an old logging camp, a few acres untouched by claims or greed. There, they built something new. Luke carved a cabin with his hands. Ellen grew food in long rows. Helena rode each morning, the mare from the ranch now hers again, strong and sleek. Caleb came and went. He had fire in his feet. But he always returned. Time passed. And with it, the tension loosened its grip. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the ridgeline and the sky turned to honey, Ellen sat on the porch with a journal in her lap. Her fingers moved slow over the page, ink trailing like memory. Inside, Helena played a tune on the music box Luke had given her. The sound was thin but sweet, a ribbon of sound curling into the air. Ellen looked up, toward the trees, toward the trail that had once been a place of blood. She didn't cry. She smiled. Luke stepped out from the shadows, carrying kindling. His eyes found hers, and he nodded once. She stood, took one piece from his arms, and brushed a loose hair from her cheek. They didn't need words. Not now. Love had grown not from passion but presence. A quiet thing. A certain thing. And maybe that's all anyone really wants. Not to be rescued, but to be seen. To be safe without being small. To be free without being alone. As night fell, Ellen read the last line of her page aloud, her voice just above the hush of the wind. "Whatever they take, don't let them quiet the part of you that still sings." The sky opened wide above them, and the stars, at last, looked like hope. A rancher's daughter was captured by the Apache, but one Apache warrior defied his tribe to save her. The morning light spilled slow across the plains, washing the world in the hushed gold of promise and memory. The grass moved like breath, like whispers from the bones of the earth. Every now and then, a hawk would cry out above the cottonwoods and disappear into the colorless blue. It was the kind of dawn that asked for silence, and Rachel Hart understood silence better than most. She moved through it like a ghost through a familiar room, light-footed, deliberate, tending to the horses before her father woke. Clover, her mare, nuzzled her shoulder as she tightened the saddle strap. She murmured something soft, half a lullaby, half a prayer, the words spilling from her lips without thought. Her hands were calloused, strong, but they moved with a grace that belied their labor. She was just 19, though her eyes held more winters than years. Not the kind that weighed you down, but the kind that shaped you. Quiet trials, unseen by most. Rachel didn't talk much. She had a voice that people forgot until they needed something from it. An answer, a yes, a meal. But when she did speak, her words always felt like they meant something. Even her silences had weight. Folks in the town called her proud, strange, too much like her mother. Thomas Hart, her father, called her useful. A good hand. Said it like a compliment, but never quite warm. Their ranch lay along the southern stretch of the Arizona Territory, where land met heat and heat met hardship. It wasn't much, just acres of brittle grass, some cattle, and a sagging wooden house with a porch that leaned to one side like it was tired. Thomas had built the place with his own hands, and Rachel had spent her childhood filling the cracks, with effort, with presence, with love she never expected to be returned. After her mother died from fever 5 winters past, Thomas had folded in on himself like a man reading the last page of a long book. He did not speak of grief. He worked. He drank a little. He scolded. And he let Rachel do more and more of the living. Most girls her age, in town at least, were already courting or married. They wore ribboned hats and practiced the art of being seen. Rachel wore her dead mother's boots, carried a rifle when riding fence, and preferred the company of old trees to idle talk. That didn't sit right with many, especially not with Elias Mayfield. Elias had been sniffing around the Hart Ranch for months. He was all swagger and boots polished too clean for dirt roads. Son of the banker, full of plans and praises for himself. He fancied Rachel as something to tame, called her girl like it was a game, like he was playing at possession. He'd ride up, flash a toothy grin, and speak loud enough for Thomas to hear. Ain't no shame in settin' aside the rifle, Rachel. You ought to be thinkin' of weddin', not branding irons. She never answered him. Not out of shyness. Out of disinterest. Her silence itched at him. Men like Elias didn't like being invisible. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and turned the dust to embers, he cornered her by the barn, a bottle in his hand and swagger in his step. You could have it easy, he said, leaning too close. No more breakin' your back out here. I could take care of you. Rachel met his gaze and held it, her voice soft but flat. I don't need taken care of. He chuckled, but the sound held no humor. You don't know what you need. She left him standing in the dust, the bottle still dangling from his fingers. Later that night, Thomas looked up from his drink as she came in from the dark. You should give Elias a chance. He's got means. You can't work the land forever. Rachel took off her hat, wiped the sweat from her brow, and said nothing. She walked to the back room, shut the door gently, and let the silence do the rest. What Thomas didn't understand, what no one understood, was that Rachel didn't want saving. She didn't want to be looked at like property, traded for comfort or name. She wanted space. She wanted truth. She wanted to live a life that was hers, even if it was hard, even if it was lonely. That night, she lay awake listening to the wind push against the shutters. Something in it sounded different. Sharper. Like teeth on bone. The next day broke too still. The birds didn't sing. The dogs didn't bark. Just the low moan of wind and the stretch of shadow. It happened fast. They came not like thunder, but like smoke, barely seen until they were everywhere. Apache riders, painted in dust and firelight, moved through the ranch with the quiet precision of men who knew the land better than they knew their own breath. Rachel had just stepped out to fetch water when the first arrow hit the porch post. Then came the shout, not English but sharp, like the cry of a hawk striking down. She turned just in time to see a rider bearing down on her, eyes dark, face unreadable. She ran. She didn't scream. Rachel Hart was not one to waste breath on panic. She darted between the corral and the shed, her boots kicking up dust. Clover neighed in panic behind the fence. A hand grabbed her, rough, calloused, and for a moment she thought it was her father. But the grip was too strong, the arm too bare. She struggled, kicked, bit. Then darkness wrapped around her as something cloth and damp pressed to her face. Her last sight before the world slipped was her scarf, yellow, frayed, caught on the fence rail, fluttering like a signal, like a goodbye. When Thomas Hart came to, he was bleeding from the scalp. The front door had been kicked in, the house ransacked. One horse was gone. 2 cattle lay dead. And Rachel was nowhere. By the time the sheriff rode out with a search party, the trail was cold. The tracks vanished into the red rock hills like water into sand. Some said she was dead. Others whispered worse, that the Apache would keep her, claim her, break her. Thomas didn't cry. He poured a drink. Then another. By morning, he couldn't speak her name without slurring it. Elias came by, pretending concern, but his eyes betrayed something else. A man wronged by fate, not by love. If she'd listened, she'd be safe. The ranch fell silent. But out beyond the mesas, where the stars burned close and the wind told no lies, Rachel Hart was not gone. She was breathing, still. Bound, yes. Taken, yes. But not broken. Not yet. And far off in that quiet wild, unseen by any who had known her before, a man with eyes like river stone watched the girl they had brought in. He said nothing. Not yet. But something in his gaze was not like the others. Not hunger. Not hate. Something waiting. Something true. And the wind carried her name, not like a prayer, but like a promise. Rachel awoke to the sound of firewood snapping and the scent of ash and earth. The world she opened her eyes to was low-lit, full of movement but hushed, like a dream that had swallowed her whole. She was lying on a woven mat inside a dome of willow branches and hide. The walls breathed with the wind, shifting in and out like lungs. Every limb ached, her wrists bore rope burns, and her lips were dry enough to crack. But she was alive. She sat up slowly. A dull ache rolled through her skull, then steadied. No chains, no guards with rifles, only absence. Her thoughts reeled, but her face stayed still. That was how she survived things. By watching first, waiting second, acting last. Outside, the sun slanted down through thin pines and dust, casting long shadows that moved like memories across the camp. There were voices, children laughing, a dog barking, the low song of a woman grinding corn. Life was happening here. Real, ordinary life. It unsettled her more than war cries would have. She stood, though her knees trembled, and moved toward the flap. No one stopped her. A few turned their heads, mostly women, eyes unreadable. Some curious, some closed. A boy no older than 10 tossed a bone to the dog and pointed. "Nadlihi," he whispered. She didn't know the word, but the way he said it wasn't cruel. Just different. The first to meet her gaze without looking away was an old woman sitting near the fire. Her hair was silver, braided with dried sage, her skin like folded paper, lined by sun and sorrow. She looked straight into Rachel's eyes and motioned her over with a nod. Rachel obeyed. The old woman handed her a bowl of something warm, a porridge of ground acorns and dried berries. No words. Just presence. The kind of presence that didn't need translation. Rachel ate, slowly. Her stomach rebelled at first, then surrendered. She hadn't known hunger until that moment, the kind that swells behind ribs like grief. The old woman spoke only once, tapping her own chest with a gnarled finger. "Gray eye." Then she tapped Rachel's. Rachel hesitated, then said, "Rachel." Her voice was hoarse, a breath wrapped in dust. Gray eye nodded, satisfied. The moment was sealed. Not friendship, not yet, but something rooted. The man who had taken her, the one who'd pulled her from the ranch, bound her, disappeared, was nowhere in sight. She didn't know his face well enough to remember it clearly, only a feeling. Calloused hands, quiet movement, a shadow that didn't lean toward violence but didn't turn from it either. She spent that first day walking the edge of the camp, memorizing its borders. No fences, just space. But she could feel the boundary in the way eyes followed her. The message was quiet but clear: you're watched, but not hunted. A group of young warriors sat around a fire near the center, sharpening blades, speaking in low tones. One of them looked at her with open disdain. He was lean, long-haired, his chest bare despite the chill. He spit in the dirt when she passed. That night, Gray Eye brought her a blanket. Stiff wool, but warm. Rachel didn't speak. She couldn't. Not yet. She stared at the stars and listened to the foreign rhythm of a language that wrapped around her like smoke. Sleep came, jagged and thin. The days passed like river stones, worn smooth by repetition. She ate what she was given. She carried water when Gray Eye gestured. She watched the women weave, listened to the children's games. Still a prisoner, but no one struck her, no one screamed. That absence became louder with each passing moment. On the 5th morning, he appeared. She was by the stream, rinsing a tin cup, when he stepped beside her without sound. She flinched, her body still remembering the chase, the grip, the loss. But he only held out a piece of fruit, wild plum, split and soft. She looked at it, then at him. He did not force it on her. He just held it there, patient as weather. She took it. His face was young, but not boyish. His features were sharp, carved from the same stone as the mesas that loomed in the west. His eyes, dark and steady, held no victory, only awareness. He had seen her fear, seen her silence. And still he stood there, offering not comfort, but presence. She spoke first, voice thin as wind. "Why am I still alive?" He didn't answer. Or maybe he didn't understand. But something in his gaze shifted. Not pity, not guilt. Something closer to respect. Later, she heard Gray Eye whisper his name to a group of women sorting maize. "Taza," she said aloud, testing the shape of it. Gray Eye nodded. Taza. The man who had taken her. The man who now brought her small kindnesses. Water, food. One time even a flower with the stem broken clean. The others noticed. One of the warriors, the one who had spat, began to scowl more openly. He watched Taza with a look full of something raw and sharp. Jealousy, perhaps, or history. She learned, slowly, the edges of their world. They were not monsters. They were not myths. They sang at dusk. They wept for their dead. They carved toys for children. And every night they burned cedar, sending prayers into the dark. But still, she was not one of them. She was always watched. Always outside the circle. And she understood that the mercy she'd been given had cost something. Not just to her, but to him. One morning, as she helped Gray Eye sort roots, Taza approached and knelt beside her. He tapped his chest. "Taza." "I know," she said. He smiled, not with teeth, but with eyes. It softened him, made him less stone, more story. He pointed at the root. "Satisai," he said. She repeated it, fumbled the sound. He laughed quietly, then said it again, slower. They continued that way for an hour, trading words like secrets, sounds like songs. She taught him too, simple ones, water, tree, home. He would repeat them, nod, commit them to memory. The next day, she taught him blue. He pointed to her eyes, then to the sky. That night, as the fire cracked and the children dozed, she sat alone with her bowl of soup. Taza approached but did not sit. Instead, he gestured to the edge of the camp, where the trees thickened. She hesitated, then stood. He led her not far. Just past the last tent, near a cliff that overlooked the valley. The moon hung low, lighting the land like silver. She could see everything, the trails winding down, the river coiled in shadow, the stars mirrored in its bend. He spoke then, words slow, careful, not all English but close enough to understand. "My sister," he said, pointing at the river. "Taken. Long ago. White men. Never came back." Rachel looked at him, something tightening in her chest. "I hate them," he said, voice steady. "But not all. Not all." She understood the cost of that confession. The risk of it. He didn't say he was sorry for taking her. He didn't ask forgiveness. But the truth stood between them like a bridge. And she, who had been nothing but stolen, felt something returned. They stood in silence until the cold crept in. The days turned again, and with them her fear dulled. Not gone, never gone, but no longer ruling her. One afternoon, she was grinding corn beside Gray Eye when Lone Fox, the angry one, stopped and pointed at her. "She is still here," he said in English, thick with disdain. "Still breathing. Still white." Taza stepped from the shadows behind the fire, slow, deliberate. "She is not enemy. She is not ours," Lone Fox snarled. "You forget blood." Rachel didn't understand the rest. The words spilled fast, bitter, heavy with history. But she saw it in their faces, the line being drawn. The tribe had not decided what she was, or who Taza had become. Gray Eye stood between them, said something quiet and final. Lone Fox spat once more, then turned away. Later, as the fire dimmed, Taza sat beside her again. "You want go?" he asked. She looked at him, surprised. He searched her face. "You not slave. Not now." "I don't know," she said, honest. He nodded once, then handed her a pine branch. It smelled like the edge of memory. That night, she lay awake thinking of rivers and roots and hands that offered instead of taking. She wasn't free. But neither was she trapped in the same way. Something was shifting, not just in the camp, but inside her. And somewhere beyond the hills, a world she no longer trusted waited. But here, in the quiet of firelight and names shared like prayers, a different kind of waiting bloomed. She didn't know what she would choose, only that something sacred had begun. The days passed with a rhythm of breath and dust. The world no longer held sharp edges for Rachel, though it had not softened either. It had only changed shape, less a prison now, more a question. One she answered slowly, with her hands, her eyes, her silences. She spent her mornings collecting water, her afternoons grinding corn beside Gray Eye or watching the children chase one another through the dry brush. At night, she listened to the drumbeats echo across the hills, not with fear anymore, but with a strange ache she couldn't name. Taza came often, never too close, never too long. His presence had become a kind of quiet, the kind that waited until you needed it, then appeared without fanfare. He spoke more now, his English broken but deliberate. Each word from him felt like it had been carved, not spoken. One evening, he found her at the edge of camp where the sky bent low over the canyon. The wind was soft, scented with juniper and firewood. He didn't speak at first. He just stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, the space between them humming. "You dream of home?" he asked, voice hushed. Rachel didn't answer immediately. Her fingers played with the edge of her shawl, a thread unraveling between thumb and forefinger. "I dream of quiet," she said. "Of water running through cottonwood roots. Of my mother's hands." Taza tilted his head, considering. "You carry her in you. I'm not sure she'd recognize me now." He looked toward the stars, then back at her. "She would. You do not break." They sat for a while, saying nothing, the fire from the camp flickering in their periphery. He handed her something from his satchel, a small carved figure, smooth and pale, shaped like a horse mid-gallop. She traced the grooves with the tip of her finger. "For you," he said. "Clover." "You said the name." She blinked, stunned that he'd remembered. She held the figure tighter, heart rising like wind off canyon walls. "I didn't think you were listening." He turned his face toward her. "I listen always." The fire between them did not burn hot. It smoldered. It breathed. It was not about longing, not yet. It was something older, deeper, recognition. Not of flesh, but of soul. Gray Eye saw it first. The way Rachel's gaze lingered, the way Taza's voice lowered when he spoke to her. She said nothing, but one morning handed Rachel a braid of sweetgrass and nodded toward the river. "Give to him," she said. "He walks with ghosts. Maybe now he walks with light." Rachel took it, unsure. The sweetness of it filled the air between her fingers. She didn't give it to him right away. Instead, she waited until the next evening, when the camp was asleep, and the moon was high and watching. She found him near the horses, brushing down a paint gelding. The rhythm of it was meditative, the strokes long and slow. She approached without speaking, holding out the sweetgrass. He looked at it, then at her, brows drawn in quiet surprise. "It's for healing," she said. "Or for memory. Maybe both." Taza took it gently, as though afraid the strands might vanish in his hands. "My sister," he said after a pause. "She had one. Before they came. She waited. Gave him room to speak or not. They burned our home. Took her. She was 12. I was 14. No one came for her. No one." His voice did not tremble, but the weight of it shifted the air. "I looked for her," he continued. 2 seasons. Found nothing. Just the name she scratched into a tree." Rachel's chest tightened. She thought of her own name, shouted into wind, written in dust. She took a step closer, then another, until they stood only an arm's length apart. "You're not the only one who lost someone," she said. "But you didn't become what they expected." He looked at her then, something unspoken flickering in the space between them. "No," he said. "I became something they do not understand." "And what am I to them?" she asked softly. "To you." He took a long breath. "Not enemy. Not stranger." "Then what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face, not with hunger, not with ownership, but with reverence. Like touching a wildflower that somehow bloomed in winter. That night, she didn't sleep easily. Her body lay still beneath the blanket, but her mind moved like a river swollen with rain. There was a warmth growing in her, not desire, not yet love, but something like trust, something like safety. She had not felt that in a long time. But not all eyes in the camp were blind to what passed between them. Lone Fox grew colder. His words sharpened. His movements near her took on a roughness, a challenge. One morning, as Rachel drew water from the stream, he approached. "You think you are one of us?" he hissed. "He forgets blood. You make him forget." She stared at him, unflinching. "I don't want to be one of you," she said. "I just want to be treated like a person." His lip curled. "You are white. That is all they will remember." Later, she told Taza what had been said. He listened without interruption, eyes closed, like the words were a storm he had already walked through. "Lone Fox lost his brother," he said. "Soldiers shot him when he came to trade. He cannot forget. Do you?" Taza shook his head. "I remember. But I choose what I become from it." The next few days were quiet but tense. The air between her and Taza remained unchanged, but around them, the camp shifted. Fewer smiles. Less warmth. Even Gray Eye began to watch with something like worry. One afternoon, Taza gave Rachel a knife. "For you," he said, "to choose your path." She took it, not as a threat, but as a gesture. He was not keeping her. He was not holding her. He was, in some quiet way, setting her free. She could go. She could stay. The choice was becoming hers. That night, a storm gathered on the horizon, distant thunder rolling like drums in the belly of the earth. The fire in the camp danced wilder, and the smoke curled higher, as if sensing the change to come. Rachel sat by the flames, carving a piece of wood with the knife. Her hands moved slow, but her heart moved fast. She was making something, she didn't know what yet, but it was hers. She felt it in the shaping, the smoothing, the silence. Taza sat across from her, watching, waiting. She looked up, held his gaze. "Tell me something true," she said. He thought for a long time. "When I first saw you," he said, "I thought you would break." She smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "And now?" "Now," he said, "I see a fire." The storm broke just after midnight. Rain swept the camp clean, and the wind howled like an old name called back to life. Most huddled inside their shelters, but Rachel stepped into the downpour, arms wide, face lifted. Taza found her standing in the open, soaked through, laughing, not loud, but free. He didn't stop her. Just watched. And in that moment, she was not captive, not outcast, not girl nor woman, not white nor wild. She was just real. Alive. And though no words passed between them then, a promise did. Not of forever. Not even of love. But of seeing. And being seen. And that was enough. For now. The days that followed were thinner somehow, like threads pulled too tight on a loom. Even the wind felt different, sharp, whispering warnings Rachel couldn't quite make sense of. The calm that had grown in the camp, the delicate space between herself and Taza, was no longer untouched. Something had shifted. And shift, she knew, often came before fall. She noticed it first in the eyes. The way conversations stopped when she walked past. The way the children who once giggled nearby now stood silent, watching their elders. Lone Fox no longer hid his disdain. He wore it openly, like a blade at his belt, daring anyone to question the weight of his hate. His grief had turned inward and then outward, and now it had found a shape. Her gray eye still offered quiet comfort, but even she grew tighter-lipped. Her warnings came without words. A bowl left full at dawn, a hand placed gently on Rachel's shoulder after dark, a look that lingered too long. There were things not being said. And silence, Rachel had learned, was its own kind of storm. Taza remained steady, though shadows had gathered at his edges. He spoke little during the day, disappearing into the hills with the other men, returning after sunset, dust clinging to his clothes, weariness behind his eyes. But he still sought her in the quiet hours, after the others had turned in, when the stars were the only witnesses. He'd sit near her and listen as she spoke of home, of old songs, of her mother's habit of humming while darning clothes. His presence soothed her, but even then, something in him was bracing, like a tree expecting lightning. One night, she found him sharpening his knife by firelight, the motion slow, methodical. "They don't trust me," she said, her voice barely louder than the crackle of the flames. Taza paused. "They do not understand why you are still here." "And do you?" His gaze lifted to hers. "Yes." She let the silence breathe between them, then broke it. "Then tell me." "You are strong," he said. "You listen. You learn. You do not hate. That's not enough for them." "No," he said quietly. "It's enough for me." He stood then, walked to the edge of the camp, where the darkness pressed close. She watched him disappear into it, and for the first time since her capture, fear returned, not of violence, but of loss, of change, of being left behind. It was Gray Eye who spoke the words Rachel had been dreading. They sat beneath the overhang of a sandstone ridge, preparing bundles of dried herbs. The old woman did not meet her gaze as she said, "He is being watched. Closely." Rachel tied a knot too tight, fumbling. "By whom?" "By all." There was no comfort in her voice, only knowing. "Taza is not like the others," Gray Eye continued. "He carries pain differently. He loves differently." Rachel stiffened, heart stuttering. "I didn't say he." "You don't have to." She wanted to argue, to explain that this thing between them was still blooming, still fragile, not ready for names. But there was no need. The old woman had seen it long before Rachel had dared admit it to herself. Later that same day, as dusk poured its copper light across the valley, a group returned from the eastern ridge. They were not alone. 2 men, white men, bound and bloodied, dragged behind horses. "Spies," someone said. "Scouts," others claimed. One of them wore a familiar coat, its collar frayed and stained. Rachel felt the breath leave her chest. Elias Mayfield. He was bruised but unbroken, his face twisted in its usual self-certainty despite the ropes. "Well now," he muttered when he saw her. "Didn't think you'd take to feathers so easy." The warriors bristled. Rachel said nothing. Her jaw clenched. "They send more?" Taza asked one of the men who'd brought them in. "Probably," the reply came. "Not far behind." That night, the council gathered. The fire in the center burned high, tall enough to paint every face with shadow and doubt. Rachel wasn't invited, but she listened from the edge, her ears straining through the thickness of a language she was still learning. Taza spoke only once. His voice did not rise. But Lone Fox rose after him, his fury thinly veiled. "They come with guns," he said, "and he brings them a woman with white skin and soft eyes." There were murmurs. Gray Eye said something sharp. Silence followed. No decisions were made, but the camp did not sleep. Rachel found Taza near the horses again, tying knots with shaking hands. "They think I led them here," she said. "No," he answered. "They think I did." She stepped closer. "Then let's leave. Before they turn." His hands stilled. "I cannot run from my people. They'll kill you. I would rather die standing than live hiding." Rachel's throat tightened. Her heart pounded with the wild clarity of fear. She reached out, took his hand. It was the first time she had touched him without invitation, without hesitation. His fingers curled around hers slowly, like something learning to trust. "Then let me stand with you," she said. "No," he whispered. "You must go." "I won't." He looked at her then, eyes wet with something too ancient for words. He touched her face, gently, reverently. "If I don't return tomorrow," he said, "go north. Follow the river." She shook her head. "Taza." But he was already gone, swallowed by the dark. Morning broke hard and red. Taza stood before the council at sunrise, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Rachel stood behind the circle, near Gray Eye, her heart in her throat. "I will take her to the ridge," he said. "She will not return. The soldiers will find no one here." Lone Fox stepped forward, scoffing. "You think we believe you will give her up now?" "I have no choice," Taza replied. "But she has done nothing. Let her go." There was no agreement. Only silence, and the low grumble of approval and doubt blending. Gray Eye stepped forward, placed a bundle of sweetgrass at Taza's feet. "She carries no threat," she said. "Only change." It was not a blessing. It was a warning. By noon, Rachel and Taza rode out, two shadows against a sea of stone and brush. No one followed. Not visibly. They did not speak much. The horses moved with urgency, hooves striking hard earth like war drums. When they reached the ridge, Taza dismounted and helped her down. "Go," he said, nodding northward. She didn't move. "I told them I would leave you here. If they find us both gone, they will come with fire. You can come with me." He shook his head. "My bones are in this land." She swallowed the lump in her throat. Then what was all of it for? He stepped closer, took her hands in his. "To show me it was possible." They stood like that for a long time, pressed close, the wind threading around them like a song. Then, in a breath, he kissed her, not with heat, not with hunger, but with the full weight of goodbye. When he pulled away, she let him. He turned and began the slow walk back toward the camp, never once looking back. Rachel watched until he vanished behind the rocks. She stood there, arms hanging by her sides, the wind biting her cheeks, her heart breaking clean and quiet. Then she turned north. Each step away from him felt like tearing a page from her own story. But she walked. Because he had asked her to. Because courage sometimes meant leaving, not staying. Because the fire they had lit between them needed to be protected from the wind. And somewhere behind her, where the smoke would soon rise, a choice had been made. Not one of love denied, but of love defended. The circle was broken, and something new had begun. The wind came first, curling down from the canyon ridges like a warning. It whispered through the brush, picked up the scent of smoke, and scattered it westward. Rachel felt it before she saw anything. The way the air shifted. The way the birds took flight all at once. She paused on the trail, one hand on Clover's mane, the other shielding her eyes against the rising sun. Below, the land unfolded in copper and gold. Red rock mesas rose like broken teeth, and the river slithered far off in the valley, a pale shimmer between shadows. That river had always felt like a promise to her, something to follow, something to trust. But now, even the river looked like it was holding its breath. Behind her, the world she'd just left trembled. Smoke unfurled against the sky, barely visible but present. She knew what it meant. They had come. She turned, heart lodged high in her chest, and scanned the cliffs. No riders in sight, but she didn't need to see them to know. The soldiers had followed. Or the ranchers. Or both. Taza's plan, brave, selfless, had only delayed the inevitable. She climbed back into the saddle. Her hands shook. Not from fear, but from knowing too much. The price of staying silent too long, of caring too deeply. She had thought leaving was the hardest part. But now she understood, leaving was only half the wound. Clover moved swiftly, her hooves finding the trail that hugged the rocks. Rachel didn't ride toward safety. She rode toward the sound of what might be ending. She found them near the river's bend, where the water deepened and turned red with clay and runoff. The camp had been moved hastily. Tents half-pitched, horses tied close. Children ushered into cover. Men gathered in tense knots. The air was thick with waiting. Taza stood in the center, speaking to two elders. Lone Fox was nearby, his arms crossed, jaw clenched tight. When Taza saw her, his eyes narrowed, then widened with something like relief and something sharper. "You should not have come back," he said when she dismounted. "I couldn't leave," she replied. "Not like this." He didn't answer, but his hand found her shoulder, held it for a moment, then dropped. "They're close," he said. "Not many, but enough." She scanned the horizon. "They'll come angry." Taza nodded. "They'll come afraid. That's worse." The elders spoke quickly, low and urgent. Some of the younger warriors shouted over them, fists pounding thighs, voices full of heat. Rachel could understand none of it, but she could feel what was about to happen. "They want to stand," Taza said, after a moment. "Defend what's left. And you. I want to protect the children. The old. You." She shook her head. "Don't protect me. Use me." His brow furrowed. "They're here because of me," she said. "Let me speak to them. They won't hear you. Then let me try." There was silence, long and deep. Then Gray Eye stepped forward. She handed Rachel a necklace, a piece of carved bone on a leather cord. It was warm from the old woman's skin. "Wear this," she said. "It means you are not alone." Rachel slipped it over her neck. It felt like armor. They waited in the open field above the river, the place where the water curved and the land sloped gently down. It was where the camp would be most visible. The hope was not ambush, but exposure, proof that they were not hiding, that they were not preparing for war. The riders appeared just after noon. 6 of them. Mounted, armed. Dust trailing behind like smoke from a funeral pyre. At the front rode Elias Mayfield, his face set like a blade, one hand on the butt of his pistol. "Stop right there," he shouted. Taza held up a hand, then stepped aside. Rachel moved forward. She walked slowly, steadily, until she stood halfway between the two sides. The river glinted at her back. The riders before her slowed but didn't dismount. Guns shifted. Fingers twitched. Eyes narrowed. "Rachel!" Elias called. "You all right?" "I am," she said. "But you need to leave." He laughed, short and sharp. "Like hell. You've been taken." "I stayed," she said. "They didn't force me. They spared me." "They're savages," one of the men behind him barked. "They'll turn on you. They always do." Rachel took a step closer. "They haven't. But you." She stopped, looked at Elias. Really looked. "You never saw me," she said. "Not once. You wanted to own me. But you never asked what I wanted." His face twisted. "You've lost your mind." "She's a hostage," another man said. "Or worse." Stockholm or whatever they call it. I'm not a hostage, Rachel said. I'm a witness. She stepped aside, revealing Taza behind her. He stood tall, unarmed, his posture open. He could have killed me, she said. He didn't. He could have kept me. He didn't. Elias looked at her like she was a snake speaking scripture. You side with them over your own people? My people, she said, voice steady, are the ones who choose truth over fear, who know when to listen. You have a chance now. Turn around. Go home. Behind her, the wind picked up. The river swelled. A hawk circled overhead. Elias reached for his gun. Time fractured. Taza moved. Fast. Fluid. Not for a weapon, but for her. He pushed her aside as the shot rang out. The sound echoed like a scream across the canyon. Rachel fell hard, dust in her mouth, the wind knocked from her lungs. She turned, coughing, searching. Taza staggered. A bloom of red spread across his side. Then chaos. The warriors surged forward, not to attack, but to shield, to drag Taza back, to form a line between the riders and the vulnerable. Gunfire cracked again. Another horseman fell, shot not by an Apache, but by his own, panicked and confused. Horses reared. Men shouted. Rachel scrambled to Taza's side. His face was pale, lips bloodied. But he was breathing. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please. Just stay." He reached for her hand. Gripped it hard. More shots. Then, silence. The riders had fled, what was left of them. Fear carried them faster than anger ever had. They hadn't expected restraint. They hadn't expected witness. Taza was lifted onto a makeshift stretcher. Rachel rode beside him, clutching the reins tight. The world blurred with wind and tears. They returned to the shelter of the hills, to the places where voices could be low and wounds could be tended. Gray Eye worked in silence. Rachel sat nearby, her hands clasped, knuckles white. It was a full day before he woke. "You didn't listen," he rasped. "I never do," she said, weeping with laughter. His fingers found hers again. "You stayed. I always would have." That night, the camp did not dance. It didn't sing. But it breathed, alive, still whole, still together. The fire burned low, casting soft shadows. Rachel sat by Taza's side, telling him stories of the river, of home, of the wind in the cottonwood trees. He listened, eyes closed, a smile ghosting his lips. Later, when he slept, she walked to the river. The water moved slow, glimmering in the moonlight. Red with clay, not with blood. She took the carved horse from her satchel, held it in her palm, then placed it in the water. It floated for a moment, then sank. Years passed. The world turned. A child sat by a fire, her eyes wide, hair dark as midnight. She listened as the old woman beside her spoke, voice soft, low, full of smoke and memory. "He was a warrior," the old woman said, "but not because he fought, because he chose peace." The girl leaned forward. "Did they love each other?" The old woman smiled. "They saw each other. That's rarer." Outside, the river moved on, always turning, always red, not from wounds